So we are on Genesis chapter 38, where we got this, we left off a couple weeks ago. We read through this pretty salacious story of Judah and Tamar. Did we get through the whole thing? No, we just started it, didn't we? Okay, yeah, that's right. Okay. I got to get my bearings. I was going ahead. I'm like at 42, chapter 42 this morning. But so just to set the stage. So Judah goes down. He's with his buddy Hirah, and Judah saw a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her and gave her to his firstborn son. He took her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again, Onan was born, and then Shelah. It's like a boy named Sue. Shelah. And Judah, and then verse 6, Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked. We did talk about this. He did something wicked. We don't know what it was. Did something wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord said, "You're done." Struck him dead. When you see things like this in the Old Testament, though, as crazy as it seems, you have to always remember there's more behind the story than the words on the page. And it's a constant reminder to us that the Lord is holy, right? It's just like when you get to Exodus and you know, the Lord gives he gives them instructions on how to build the Ark of the Covenant, right? And they're supposed to take this Ark of the Covenant from place to place and erect the tabernacle, you know, and he gives explicit instructions about not touching the Ark. And then there's that one occasion where they're transporting the Ark, and all of a sudden it starts to slip off the pole or something, and one of the guys just puts his hand out and grabs the Ark. Dead. What, you know, and it sounds crazy. It sounds, you know.
He thought he was trying to do good, and he ended up
Exactly. But the point that's driven home to us is the Lord is holy. And nothing sinful can come into his presence. So whatever did, it was bad enough for the Lord to say, "You're done." The Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and perform," this is where we kind of left off last week, or a couple weeks ago, "perform the duty of a brother-in-law." This is what was known as Levirate marriage, or Levirate law, where the sibling, the brother, if a brother dies, a brother would produce offspring with the widow of the dead brother for the dead brother. So Onan, performing his duty to go into Tamar to produce offspring, that offspring would then be elevated above him, because they would be offspring, not his. So they would be in line to get the birthright and the inheritance, right? So what does Onan do? We talked about it a couple weeks ago. He purposely makes sure that Tamar does not get pregnant. He spills his seed, and then the Lord's not happy with that, and strikes Onan dead. So the Lord was in a grumpy mood back in these days. And so what, I know this is where we left off. What is Onan's sin here? Greed, yeah. Greed, selfishness.
Disobedience.
Huh? Disobedience. But yeah, I think greed is the main sin here, that he wants the inheritance for himself. Which is, we've seen this play out many times already in this dysfunctional family of Abrahams, where they're fighting over inheritances and stuff. And so this is just another example of that. He does not want to produce offspring with Tamar that would be Er's offspring. That's the sin. Now, if you see, if you Google the sin of Onan, you'll get all kinds of stuff about how, and there's some, there have been some Lutherans over the years who have really argued the point that that his sin was spilling his seed. Of course, that's part of it, but the act of him doing that is because of the bigger sin of not doing his duty, right? But they home in on that act, the specific act, and then they make all kinds of prohibitions. In our day and age, they apply it to our day and age and say any intercourse, even within marriage, well, the only intercourse there can be is within marriage, right? Any intercourse that is not for the sake of procreation is the sin of Onan. Which is just wildly absurd. But Google it, and if you get bored and have fun reading, going down all the rabbit trails of, because Luther said some things about it too that people run with, and they make more a mountain out of a molehill of the things he said. Luther said a lot of stuff. But Luther's point was more that is a purpose of marriage, procreation. And we should not purposely deny that purpose. I'm on board with that. To a degree. I mean that we should get married and produce offspring. Be fruitful and multiply. But be fruitful and multiply is not so much a command as it is a blessing. But to take that and then to apply it to all these other things, so no contraception. Because using contraception would mean that you're purposely avoiding the act of procreation. Or none of the other, we're all adults, but there's other ways besides procreation that you can make sure, like he does, right? Yeah. That you don't allow the seed to penetrate and possibly get the woman pregnant. So all of that, according to these guys, is out of bounds and is called the sin of Onan. I think it's ridiculous because here's the overarching thing. We don't live by this custom. This was an ancient custom, this Levirate marriage custom. Unless you know something I don't know, but when somebody's brother dies today, the other brother doesn't go have sex with the widow to produce offspring. Sometimes they do. I mean, I guess if your name's Hunter Biden, I don't know, but we're certainly not commanded to do that and expected to do it, right? I mean, it's just, this was a different time, a different custom, a different age, and the whole point being the sin was greed. He wanted it for himself. And with greed comes covetousness, right? And ultimately, that sin is idolatry. You're worshiping yourself, putting yourself above God. Do we need to say anything more about that? I think that let's move on. That's my take on it. I know there are well-meaning, good guys who would disagree with me on this and say, no, this is a prohibition against any act that results in semen being produced that is not inside of your wife. So it gets pretty graphic, but I don't see it. And the LCMS, I mean, this reached such a boiling point because is there anything wrong with those faithful Christians who do not believe in contraception and they will not practice it? No! Nothing. What is wrong is when they then apply that to everyone, other Christians, and say, if you're not doing as we're doing, now they're elevating themselves and they're making a law where there is none. We are free in Christ. And I mean, this reached a boiling point because contraception wasn't a widely used thing in the West until relatively recent times. And it really, Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, was a big proponent of this and really brought it into the mainstream. And so this has been debated in the church over and over again. And in the LCMS, their Commission on Theology and Church Relations has come out with a few different studies, but the one in the 80s was when it was really kind of, people were fighting about this issue. And it says what I'm saying. We're free in Christ. Yes, we should view procreation as a blessing of marriage, and if possible, we should seek that. But neither is it commanded, neither do you go this far as to say you can't ever use contraception. Because ultimately what that means, and I'll stop talking about this in a second, but it's still applicable to our day and age. Ultimately, if you take that to its logical end, then you can't ever have relations with your husband or wife that are for pure pleasure. And that is also a gift of marriage, that you can find pleasure in one another. And you know what I mean, right? In other words, any kind of sexual activity it turns it into something kind of robotic, where the whole point of it is to procreate. So I guess once a woman goes through menopause and can no longer produce, I guess you just what?
When she has a geriatric uterus.
You just read books the rest of your life and never touch each other again, I guess. I don't know. Or you binge watch whatever, I don't know. Anyway, so I'm not making fun of those who really have honest. I mean, I would make fun of some of them because they're just
overboard.
Yeah. But there are some faithful guys I know that are really meaningful, and they would not be mad at me for having my view. They just disagree and blah, 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 whatever. Anyway, all right, so and what he did was, verse 10, and what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Judah's sons are not bearing well. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah, my son, grows up, for he feared that he would die like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. This is great stuff. So Shelah, the third son, he's a youngin. He's not able to do he's not able to do the duty and produce offspring, which would still be Er's, the firstborn's offspring. So Judah says, go live with your parents, and then when the boy's old enough, we'll call you back and we'll perform, we'll have him perform the duty and give you offspring. Only Judah has no intention of doing that. Maybe because he sees Tamar as the cause of his boys dying. I gave to this woman, and the Lord struck him dead. I gave Onan to this woman, and the Lord struck him dead. I got to give Shelah to this woman. The Lord's probably going to strike him dead. So go away. Go live with your family. I'll call you back, wink, wink, when the time comes.
Don't call me, I'll call you. Yeah.
Right, don't call me, I'll call you. But he thinks, and you can understand. I mean, these are young guys that are just falling dead for no particular reason. It's not like they had diseases and suffered or they killed in battle or, they laid with this woman and then sometime after that they died. So you can understand Judah's his fear of this. He's only got one son left. So Tamar went and lived with her parents. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hirah. I wonder if Hirah is the bad influence here or if Judah's just got problems. And when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil, wrapping herself up, and sat at the entrance of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, and she had not been given to him in marriage. In other words, she's been waiting, and now Shelah's perfectly able. He's grown up. He's of age. And Judah has not fulfilled his word because he never intended to. So, there's a lot going on here. You got to picture Tamar is at her family's house. They're probably not wealthy. And Judah is. And she was in. And now she's out. So how do we get her back in? In other words, I think there's as we go through the text, I think there's reason to believe that her family was kind of in on this whole thing. It wasn't just her plan, but whatever, it's a plan where she goes and she sits at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. She knows that Judah will be passing through there. And when Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He turned to her, he turned to her and said, woman, stop cheapening yourself. Stop this wicked profession. Go back, right? No! He rode aside and said, come, let me come into you. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law because she covered her. Right, this is another theme we keep seeing, right? Where the boys get in trouble because they want it so bad, so badly that they don't even recognize
She decided
who they're
to take
with.
things into her own hands, sort of like Sarah.
Exactly right. Yes. She takes things into her. It's a masterful plan, though, right? And what does it tell you? Tamar knows Judah. She knows that if she puts herself in that position, she knows that if she provides the bait, he will bite.
She knows what he likes.
She knows what he likes. So it tells you a little bit about the character of Judah and how that character was known.
Said, what a soap opera.
It is kind of soap opera-ish.
To be continued.
And it's PG-13 stuff, right? I mean, this is. Then we get to the next chapter and we keep going. But anyway, so this is great. He just so bluntly, come, let me go into you. Well, she's a supposed prostitute, so nothing's for free, right? You got to make payment.
It's gonna cost more than you think.
What will you give me, she says, that you may come into me? He answered, I will send you a young goat from the flock. Well, I mean, we laugh, but that's kind of a good payment. A young goat from the flock. That's a decent price. It's more than a couple shekels, which is what prostitutes would probably normally get. So, I mean, it's kind of an exorbitant price. We don't understand it, but back in that day, young goat's a pretty valuable item. But here's where she gets them. And this is the masterful part of her little trickery. The young goat from the flock is fine. That's good payment. But she said, if you give me a pledge until you send it. He said, what pledge shall I give you? She replied, your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. Now, it's a pretty big ask.
What would be the cord she's making reference to?
I had that in my notes. Dang you, Luplo, why you gotta always ask questions like that?
Usually worn on a cord around the neck.
Yeah, it's an ornamental.
The signet is on the cord. I think that's what that means.
Is it very just like his status symbols, kind of?
Yeah, right. It's an identifying. It's like having your initials on your luggage, or on your bathrobe or your towels or whatever. But the cord itself, I think it's just a ornamental cloth, if I remember correctly. What verse is that? 18. Usually worn on a cord around the neck or as a ring. So,
signet.
yeah,
So here it says a signet ring usually worn on a cord around the neck.
yeah, exactly. So it's attached to the signet. I don't know if we know exactly you'd have to look. I'm sure you could find images of this ancient custom. But whatever the case, there's no way, and the staff that's in his hand too, there's no way that you could mistake whose these are. They are Judah's. That's the whole point. And she asks this of him, and he agrees, which is just crazy.
Yeah.
No, ask something else. I'm not giving you my personal items. What else can I give you as a pledge? No, he just says, okay.
I don't even want to say it.
What?
Yeah, you're thinking of the same word I am.
I know what you're. Does it start with an H?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. How could we say it? He's burning up with lust. How's that? That's a biblical way of saying it. He's on fire. She could have asked him forever. She could have said, "Cut off your left pinky," and he would have cut it off.
Half of your kingdom or whatever.
He's a widower. His wife has died. I'm betting that Judah kind of got around anyway. I'm sure when him and his buddy.
It looked like he knew the ropes.
Exactly. When him and his buddy Hira went to town, I'm sure they visited the local brothels, and so he's no stranger to this, but there's something about.
On 20 that says Hira seems to have been a partying friend.
There you go. I didn't read that note, but that's kind of how I picture Hira. He's the dude that's like, come on, he's getting Judah in trouble all the time. Judah's at fault himself because he goes along with it, so he's. This tells you something about Tamar too, that she was particularly fetching woman, right? I mean, she has a veil on, but still, I mean, there was something about her that made him desire her to the point where he's given up his signet cord and staff. It's crazy. So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him, which was the plan. You won't give me your boy like you're supposed to, like you promised, like the law says. So I will take your semen and produce offspring that you cannot deny.
Right, because I've got your.
And guess who's going to be back in your house? And guess whose family is going to be enriched by all of this? It's we don't see anything like this going on today.
Oh, not at all.
Where people use people in this way. It's just funny. I can't get over there's just no sweet talk here. No flirting, no seduction. It's just, come, let me go into you. Okay, but here's my price. All right, here's your price. But I suppose that's how the oldest profession always has been, right? You're just exchanging services for a fee. Anyway, so she conceives by him. Uh-oh. Then she arose and went away, and taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood, took off her disguise, went back to the family. So when Judah sent, at least you could say this about Judah, he's faithful to his promise. In this regard anyway, not in giving Shelah. Oh, he's honorable. He pays his debts. How's this? He pays his debts. He doesn't want to be in somebody's debt. Because he could have very easily, after he did the deed with her, he could have went to Timnah with Hirah and partied on and checked on the sheep, and then went back home and never thought about this again.
But he might also want to get a signet
But
ring.
exactly, this is where I'm going with this. He could have done all of that, except she wouldn't allow it because she took his stuff. And this was personal stuff that he wanted, he needed. So it was masterful on her part to make sure that he gave her those things as a pledge. Plus, they will identify him. So he sends a young goat to get his stuff back and to pay his debt. And by Hirah again. But Hirah doesn't find her. She gone. And he asked the men of the place, where is the cult prostitute who was at Anam at the roadside? And they said, what? We haven't had a cult prostitute here. But notice, it gets so crazy. Judah believed her to be a cult prostitute, which is a prostitute, is a pagan prostitute whose very service is an act of worshiping a false god. Right? You know how when Paul says, do not lay with prostitutes? That's what he's saying. He's talking about this custom of cult prostitution. In other words, you're defiling your very soul because you are performing an act of worship to a pagan god. But when you are burning with lust, you're not so concerned about that kind of thing, and you'll pretty much worship any god to get what you want. But it's more definition of Judah's character. He's mixing with all these pagans, and now he's becoming pagan. It's what happens. I mean, none of us are guilty of any of that, but I mean, that's right? We never allow the world's influences to get to us. You're all like, exactly. Where is the cult prostitute? There ain't there's no cult prostitutes been around here. So he returned to Judah and said, I have not found her. Also, the men of the place said, there was no cult prostitute. So whoever this woman was,
Is a cult prostitute different than just
Yeah, because she is performing the act in service to her God,
Oh, okay,
right? I mean, this became there were pagan temples that were built, and then temple prostitution, so that these women would devote themselves to whatever pagan god, right? And then they would facilitate your worship of God and thus their worship of that God by bringing men in to have sex with them. It's satanic is what it is. It's perverse and satanic, and like I said, we're just glad that all that stuff kind of died out years ago, and we never have any of that anymore. There's Jeffrey Epstein did hang himself. It was
Absolutely, yeah.
oh, crazy. So, no cult prostitute has been here. And Judah replied, "Let her keep the things as her own, or we shall be laughed at." In other words, whoever this woman was got the best of me. Now she's got my stuff. Let's not make a big deal out of it, because then I will be shamed. Because I'm not the kind of, I am Jacob's son. I don't go around doing this kind of stuff. Just seeing a cult prostitute on the side of the road on my way with my buddy to check on the sheep and say, "Hey, lay with me." I wouldn't do that. So, in order to protect his reputation and to avoid what he perceives will be great shame heaped upon him and upon his family, just let it go. She can have the stuff. She's probably sold it by now. Whatever. We're letting it go. About 3 months later, Judah was told, this is great stuff. It's just such a great story. "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality." And Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned."
Who's gonna get burned?
Well, because she was immoral. I'm thinking there's so many levels to this. First, she's, evidently still a relatively young woman who deserves to move on. And she was supposed to move on with Shelah, his third-born son, and he withheld him from her. And so now he's thinking she's moved on with someone else, right? But that's immoral because she's supposed to be given to my son. But you withheld him, you jerk. By the way, Judah is the son through whom the Messiah comes. Just so you know.
Right, exactly.
So Jesus did not come from the best stock. Well, he did, because he was conceived by the Holy Spirit. But you know what I mean. There's no hiding the shame in his line. But his reaction is just crazy. He is the immoral one, right?
She did trick him.
She did trick him, but if he was doing what is right in the sight of the Lord, he wouldn't have been tricked.
Yeah.
Like I said, he would have went over to the woman and pleaded with her to stop doing that. And especially if he believes that she's a cult prostitute, he should have told her that the only God is Yahweh. Not only are you doing what is perverse, but you're doing it in service to a pagan god who is the devil. Right? I mean, this is what a faithful son of Jacob should be doing. Instead, he's like, "She looks good. Let me have some of that." So his reaction is just crazy. Bring her. It's not even let me interview her. Let me talk to her. Bring her out and let her be burned. As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, saying, "By the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant." And she said, "Please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff." Then Judah identified them and said, "She is more righteous than I." You think?
Come to him now.
Since I did not give her, and you could read that, since I withheld from her my son Shelah. And he did not know her again. He's probably thinking, "Oh my God, am I going to die now?" Everyone who has relations with this woman dies.
This ain't good.
So,
Not gonna
Uh,
tempt fate here.
Yeah.
what does this remind you of? We'll have to stop here before we finish this. But what does this remind you of? There's another very famous story in the Bible, in the Old Testament, where somebody does a wicked deed, and then somebody presents him with the idea that somebody's done this wicked deed, and the person doesn't know that he's talking about him, and he just overreacts and says, "Well, that person should be condemned and die," and blah blah blah. It's a terrible way of introducing that, but
Yeah.
Sounds like
that's my hint. Sounds like what?
Sounds like something David did.
Okay, yes. David is confronted by Nathan, the prophet Nathan, and Nathan sets it up and says,
You are the man.
this man did such and such, and David's reaction is like Judah's, "Kill him." And Nathan looks at him and says, "You're the man." That's kind of what happens here, right? Burn the witch. You're the man. David confesses and is restored. I'm not so sure Judah, this could count as a full confession. I think it's more of a CYA. Just and an acknowledgement of the truth. She is more righteous than I. For I did withhold my son. But what doesn't he do?
He doesn't marry her.
Doesn't marry her.
Into his house.
Or doesn't give her to Shelah. I'm sure he took her back into the house, and but that he treated the sons well that she produced. But Judah was not a very great dude. When the time of her labor came, there were twins in her womb. Imagine that. More twins. And when she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, "This one came out first." But then he went, "Psych!" And the other baby come out first. But as he drew back his hand, behold, his brother came out, and she said, "What a breach you have made for yourself." Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward, his brother came out with the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. So, a couple things to say about this. This is a theme you see over and over throughout the Old Testament too. So, when you see these constant themes, they're for emphasis, and they're important, and they're teaching us something deeper. This idea of the firstborn being bypassed, that the one that doesn't deserve the inheritance gets it. Well, that's the whole story in a nutshell, right? It's our story. We don't deserve the eternal inheritance our Father has prepared for us, and yet we're the ones that get it. Not the ones who think they deserve it, not the ones who lay claim to it, but as a gift, we're given it. You could also say that this whole idea of, I always think of it's kind of a generality, but good versus evil. is always, so you have these twins in the universe since the time of creation, these twin opposing powers of good versus evil. And so, and you see this this clash of these twin brothers. It starts right away with the very first offspring, right? We don't know if they're twins, do we? But could be, Cain and Abel. But right away, there you see in that story good versus evil, and that's the constant theme. So the Lord is teaching us through all of this, even through these repeated stories of twins being born and the firstborn being overpassed, how his mind works, which is not how ours works. His ways and thoughts are not our ways and thoughts. I just find it interesting that you see this constant theme. The other thing is, I think the Lord despises bullies and those who place themselves in power above others and then abuse those people. I think he utterly detests that, and so he's always elevating. He's always on the side of the underdog, the weak, the poor. Because who is it behind all of that bullying and all of that? It's Satan. Satan wants to create conflict and division and chaos and suffering. He wants the children of God to be constantly battling one another. And so Satan uses his instruments to accomplish that, puts people in power to do that, and God always says, nope, I'm going to empower these people. It's just all the time. The mighty he brings low, the humble he exalts. You can't, that's everywhere in the Psalms, in Scripture. And it's the people who receive his grace are the people who know they don't deserve it. So, you can take, and ultimately, all of these stories point to Christ. The one he came to his own, but his own desired him not. His own did not want him, did not know him, did not want him. And yet he came to be the light of the world for all sinners. All right, anyway, so there's all these bigger general themes you can pluck out of this. What we've learned at the end of this chapter, though, is that you have these twins being born, and Perez, if you turn to, let me just ask you, trivia. Who is Perez in the broader story of things? How does Perez relate to the Messianic line?
Well, he's in the line, I know that.
Right.
Yeah.
Ruth chapter 4. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered Jesse fathered, in unison now.
Somebody, Jesse father.
We were just talking about a minute ago.
Moses?
Jesse fathered, starts with a D and ends with an David.
David.
The root of Jesse's tree. Come on, the branch of Jesse.
Sorry. Apparently we all need more coffee.
So there you see,
Yeah.
you get like 7 generations later and you get David from Perez. From this son who was born out of the sort of incestual, more very perverse, deceptive act comes forth Perez, who 7 generations later you get David. So this is, and Boaz. So Boaz, 1, 2, so Salmon was dad, Nahshon was granddad, Amminadab was great-granddad, Ram, great-great, Hezron, great-great-great, Perez was great-great-great-great-granddad of Boaz. Anyway, so I mean, it's not a huge distance. But imagine, I mean, the whole point of that story, well, there's a lot of reasons to provide that story, but the main point of that story is to tell us about Perez. Because Judah is the line, and now Perez comes, and Perez can be traced to David, and then of course to Jesus. Anyway, so.
Did they grow up in Judah's household or her household?
Oh, Judah's household for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that would not have. In fact, probably the whole family was given a wing. This is how I imagine things happen. I mean, he never married Tamar. He never gave Tamar to Shelah, right? And they co-parented. But I'm betting that, on Judah's compound, they had a residence for not only Tamar, but her family. That's usually how things went back then. So, anyway. So, it's just amazing that our Lord's genealogy includes incest and harlotry, just full of sinners, murderers, rapists. Then again, it shouldn't be that amazing because he came from humanity. And humanity is by nature full of those things. Anyway, so got plenty of time. So chapter 39, let's move forward and move on. Now we turn back to, remember we had 37, we had the Joseph story where he ends up being sold into Egypt, right? Then we had this interlude. Oh, wait a minute, let me tell you about this Judah and Tamar thing. All right, now back to the story of Joseph. So we go back to the story of Joseph, and what do we find right away? We find another, days of our lives, soap opera,
Look more like the young and the rest.
The Young and the Rest. How do you know? Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had purchased him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. And then the very next verse, this is the controlling verse. And we see it repeated over and over again. This is the controlling verse. Get it? The Lord, Yahweh, was with Joseph. That's all that matters. Everything else is just a result of that. Everything else is just a result of that. The Lord was with Joseph. And he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master, this is amazing stuff. Don't bypass it. Don't just read through this. You got to think about this stuff. His master, an Egyptian, captain of the guard, saw that Yahweh was with Joseph, and that Yahweh, this foreign god, this is amazing stuff. Egyptians do not worship Hebrew gods. And yet, somehow, through the Holy Spirit's influence maybe, this master, Potiphar, recognized Yahweh, and that he was Joseph's God, and that Yahweh caused all that Joseph did to succeed in his hands. So in other words, this is why I'm saying this is amazing. He does not attribute this so much to Joseph's ability and skills, but to the blessing of Joseph's God. Now, this is, of course, this is not faithfulness. Potiphar doesn't become a Yahwehite. You know, he's not going to worship Yahweh. But it does show that the ancient Egyptians, and we have many proofs of this, but even in the Bible does show that the ancient Egyptians were very religious people, and they believed in higher powers. They believed in, it's not just, you know, by the time you get to the Roman Empire and Jesus' time, most Romans are like the gods. Some of them, I mean, there's a big percentage. It's kind of like today. You know, yeah, I believe in Jesus. Because that's the nice thing to say. You know, 70-some% of Americans still claim to be Christian. Where only 30% go to church regularly, meaning at least once a month. So, but this just shows the nature of these Egyptians, especially the ones in power. They really believed this stuff, and so for whatever reason, Potiphar was given to recognize that Joseph's God, Yahweh, pretty powerful God, and he blesses everything Joseph does. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had, because that's what you do when you have somebody whose God is causing whatever he does great success, and it's in your household, and you purchased this dude at a very nice, reasonable price, and you got his God with him. It was 2 for the price of 1. You didn't even know it. And what a bargain, what a deal, because his God is with him and does things that our gods don't do.
Things are going to turn out okay.
So, of course, because Potiphar wants more stuff. He wants more success. So what do? Put that guy in charge. His God does everything. His God blesses everything he does. Let's do it. So he puts him in charge. Joseph found favor in his sight, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. You keep seeing this. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had. Repetition. In house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. What? It's a lap of luxury, man. I just keep going back to the fact, this is like buying a slave and having that slave be a genius in the stock market or something and make you billions of dollars. So all you got to do is sit. First of all, you would elevate that slave to top slave. Right? I mean, it's not. We're not gonna. Think about this. And this kind of stuff actually happened. I mean, not to this degree, but you don't free them, because if you set him loose, now all those blessings go with him. His God goes with him. So you keep him as a servant, but you make him top servant. And he's just in charge of all the other servants now. He's not. He's still a slave, but he's not treated as such. He's treated as the master of the house. It's kind of like, just because I brought up slavery, I don't, how many of you have seen Django Unchained?
Oh,
Tarantino.
it's a long time, quite a while ago now.
It's hard to watch that because it is so.
Well, sure, but I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of par for the course for Tarantino movies.
Yeah.
But,
It's not
but what,
something-
the only reason I bring that up is because what Joseph becomes is kind of like the character Samuel L. Jackson plays.
Yeah.
He's the house, the master of the house. He's the master of all the servants, of all the slaves. I won't say what his title is, but you probably know if you watch, if you know anything about that time. He's the house blank. And that's what Joseph becomes. You know, and like in Django Unchained, Samuel L. Jackson, he doesn't want for anything. But he's also, and he has his master's ear, Leo DiCaprio, right? He's got a Master Candy's ears, but he's not. He lives in a beautiful suite in the house, and he's got all the luxuries as if he owns the house himself, but he's still a slave. That's Joseph. Anyway, I don't know why this makes me think of that, but
I'm not sure the people
But it is a
that
good-
made that movie were thinking of that correlation though. We're talking Hollywood here.
no, no. I don't think no, not at all. Not at all. But I'm just saying this is something you see. This is something in fairly modern times that we can see that has always been around, and it's just common sense. If you really believe this dude is making you all this money, you're going to elevate him, and you're going to keep him as yours, your little money-making pet. And all you have to do is sit back and break it in. He didn't have to worry about anything except the food he ate. And then you get this next verse. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, like mother, like son. Right? Who's his mom? Thank you. Who's Jesse's son?
David.
Good Lord.
We failed today.
Jesse was from.
And you stood there, you're like, and Jesse's son was, starts with a D.
And from AVID.
Right? But this is an interesting little verse to insert here because, oh my gosh, I'm exercising right now. I hate when I do that.
Flailing your arms.
My heart rate's only 72 heartbeats, so that's not very good exercise,
All right, jumping jacks.
Let's go.
right? I have no idea how I pushed that, but I'm wondering because it went off and it's like, do you still want to be exercising? All right, so, but this is a strange verse to insert here. But whenever you see this kind of verse, you know it's going to have import for what follows, right? It's the same thing. Now, Sarai was very beautiful, and that immediately has application in that they go to Egypt and the Pharaoh wants her and blah, blah, blah. But I don't think, and I was looking at this a couple weeks ago when I was studying this chapter, and I don't think this is said of another man throughout the Old Testament. I don't think this kind of description is given to any other man. And right away you might be thinking of David, but it's not this kind of description.
Ruddy in appearance.
Ruddy in appearance.
That was always given to the women.
Always to the women. You see a lot of this to the women, of course. But I don't think there's another character in the Old Testament where this description, another male character in the Old Testament where this description. So I mean, this is kind of, I don't know if that's just a trivia thing, but I think it distinguishes Joseph from the rest of the pack.
What was considered handsome at the time? Like, you know, how different cultures.
Well, he's handsome in form and appearance, so he's, I don't know, does it really change over time? I don't
Well,
know.
like,
I don't think so.
Cultures have different, you know, like, you know, some cultures darker skin, some cultures lighter skin.
Sure,
some cultures-
well, he's definitely darker skinned because he was
Yeah,
living in
well,
Egypt.
For sure, but, you know, just.
Middle
different-
Easterners, but,
yeah, different ideas of beauty.
I think, I mean, we can all deny it and we can, but I think there's a kind of a universal recognition of, wow, when you see a beautiful woman or a handsome man, you're like, that's a handsome man. You know what I mean? I think, now, of course, there's a subjective reality to that, and you can see somebody who the rest of the world doesn't think is beautiful and all that kind of stuff. Of course, all of that's true, but I just think, whatever the case, he was obviously a good-looking dude in form and appearance, and he's well built. He's
Strong.
the kind of young man that a master of a house's wife would want, because that's why we're told this,
Yeah.
right? Anyway, but it's a good question. I mean, there are definitely different characteristics. You're right, culturally speaking, I think, because, you know, maybe people in Europe or people in South America might have different, but I think there's even still a universality to it. Whatever.
Yeah,
And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, lie with me. Lie with me. I am the master's wife. You must do what I say. Right? I mean, you get to, what's the one, because he brought up soap operas, what's the one, Susan Lucci, is that what her name was? The one that never won the war, or whatever. But she always played this kind of haughty woman character. Did she get no more? I don't know.
12 husbands?
Oh, really?
I think they got them all on stage one time.
Wow.
She's,
Yeah, I didn't know that, and it's kind of TMI for me. But but it's just direct. Just direct. Hey, boy, I know you're over the whole house now, and my master really loves you, and but you're still mine. You're still a slave. Come here. Lie with me. And then notice Joseph's response. It's great stuff. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except yourself, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against my master, your husband? No! Against God. In other words, Joseph, it's not, there's still a touch of, Joseph was a very arrogant teenager, right? He was sold when he was 17 years old by his brothers. And we saw, you know, I'm going to rule over all of you, even though I'm the second youngest. And tattletailed, whatever the past tense of tattletale is. Tattled. There you go. He tattled on his brothers, and his daddy gave him everything, even the coat of many colors, which is kind of going to come into play here in a second. So he was very arrogant, and that it's kind of diminishing from him, but it's still slightly there. Well, I am the head of the house, and everything that belongs to your master is mine. The only exception being you. And I'm not going to ruin that. But more importantly, that would be a sin against my God. So, in other words, Joseph recognizes that nothing that his arrogance about himself is now turning into faith in his God. Recognizing that the only reason God gave him those teenage dreams that he blurted out to his brothers was because he had great plans for him later. And that it was all God's doing. He's even beginning to realize that the fact that he was sold into slavery by his brothers would be to be placed in Egypt, right? He doesn't know where that's fully going to go yet, but the point being, you can see a maturity and a growth in Joseph's faith, where he's now recognizing this is the blessing of God, and I can't sin against that. And this would be a very hard thing for you, because for Joseph's in his 20s now. He's not an old wise man yet. He's in his 20s with raging hormones, and here comes this woman, and you imagine that she's an attractive woman to be Potiphar's wife, you know, probably a trophy wife. They don't have a very good marriage, as we see as we go through the story. It's not like they're madly in love with one another. She's his wife. She's there to produce, to make him look good and to produce offspring for him. You with me? It's this kind of, again, we don't see anything like that today, but how many it's a stereotype, but it's a stereotype because there's truth to it. You don't see very many very wealthy men married to ugly women. You know what I mean? In fact, a lot of them. I can't even think of his name. New England Patriots coach. What's his name?
Belichick.
Belichick. I couldn't think of Bill Belichick for a second. Bill Belichick, what is he, like in his 70s now? And he's married to
Really
like...
good looking, but a lot younger they have too, yeah.
Well, but she's, there are these model types, and she's like in her 20s or something, isn't she?
Yes, I think so.
I don't know. Don't quote me on any of that. But I mean, you
would see that all over when the rich people.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. This is not uncommon throughout history. Money can't buy you love, but it can buy you the appearance of it. And it can buy you a beautiful wife who's willing to live that way and all that kind of stuff. So my point is, this is the only reason I'm bringing all that up is because this is not an easy thing for Joseph to deny. As a, mid-20s, I don't know, maybe mid to late 20-year-old young man, handsome, has desires. And here's this woman throwing herself at him. And he says no. Pretty admirable. And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. Now, I think this is the way I read it, because you gotta flesh out the story more for yourself. But I read it as she thinks, she first commands him directly, let's do this, lie with me, and he refuses. So then she tries an indirect, subtle approach over time. Wear him down, right? In other words, when he says no, she's like, challenge accepted. I'm gonna get you. And you don't know her motives. Is she, we could assume a lot of things. She's probably not happy with Potiphar. She probably lusts after this beautiful young man in her house. So she probably has that desire. But also maybe she wants to get back at her husband. Who knows? There's whatever the case.
If we needed to know, we'd be told.
Well, right. but she pursues him. And it becomes this gradual thing where she kind of hounds him, and she's always probably flirting with him all the time, probably showing him a little skin here and there, you know, I mean, just playing around with him, trying to get him to seduce him into complying with her wishes. But Joseph doesn't even listen to her, would not listen to her, and to lie beside her or to even be with her. In other words, when he would see her coming, he would go the other way, just so as to not have to be tempted by her. And I think the reason I'm bringing it up, I think he is tempted by her. As any mid-20, late 20-year-old young man would be. That's a stereotype too, but it's a stereotype because there's truth to it, that most men will not turn that down. If confronted with that opportunity, that's why men are pigs. Men are from Mars and women are from Venus or whatever. But anyway, but Joseph does, and it's hard for him to do it. That's the point I want to emphasize. It's not easy. It's not like, oh, woman, I have no desire for you. Just leave me be. No, it's like, I'm going to cave, so I got to stay away from her. That's the picture I get when I read through this. Anyway, but one day, when he went into the house to do his work, remember, he's been trying to stay away from her. She's in that section of the house. He's in another section. He doesn't want to be around her. But one day, none of the men were in the house. None of the men of the house was there in the house. She caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. So, that's how she started this whole thing. Lie with me. He refused. She played this game with him for who knows how long, trying to get him to seduce him. It's almost working to the point where Joseph's got to stay away from her. And then finally, she has this instant where they're alone in the house, and she grabs him by the garment, pulls him into her room, says, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. He left the cord and signet in her hand, or he left the robe of many colors, right? That's how they identified Joseph was mauled by beasts. They took that robe, put blood on it, and took that robe to dad. Joseph has an identifying cloth. And this brings me, folks, to the Shroud of Turin. No.
I was watching videos about that.
I'll tell you what, I just watched one a couple nights ago where there's even new evidence. It's great. It's overwhelming stuff. But none of you believe in it, so I'll leave it alone. He left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of Dodge. Got out of the house. Not going to let this happen. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, see, he is brought among us. Who's the he there?
Potiphar.
Yeah, her husband. This is a hint. The things...
Things ain't all right.
Yeah, it's not a lovey-dovey marriage.
Ain't love in paradise.
It's not love in paradise, for sure. That jerk has brought this Hebrew among us. And notice that she brings all the servants of the house, and she's including herself among them as if she's one of them. You know, pretty queen princess.
Beware of a woman scorned.
Well, that's where it's going, yeah, of course. But see, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. My husband's such an idiot. He came into me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house. Now, one thing I think you can assume from this is that Joseph, up to this point, had not told anybody about any of this. He did not want to bring shame upon his master. He probably didn't tell his master, he didn't want his master to know. It's not like who knows? I just get I assume that the reason the household buys into her story is because they don't know what's been going on. Although, I mean, many of them might, who knows? Many of them might know her and know her the way she is and might not buy her story, who knows?
She's tried it with a few others.
Maybe she's done right, exactly. Maybe Joseph's not the first, so maybe there's a different way to look at this. Whatever the case, she's trying to get witnesses on her side, and she's trying to take control of the narrative, and then produce her own story produce her own narrative to get people to buy into it, like all of your modern media does today. Just come up with a narrative and then sell it. And that's what she's doing with the servants of the house. Because what's going to happen is whether or not they all believe her, whether or not they all buy her story, they're all going to be talking about the story. And then that story is going to go not just in that house, it's going to go, down the road in the subdivision to the next house, and then eventually somebody's going to put it on Facebook and, off we go.
Right.
And then Pharaoh, the captain of Pharaoh's guard, is going to be looked at like, like how can you let your wife be treated this way? Like he doesn't have control of his household. That's what she's doing. Notice she turns it exactly on its head. It says the same words she actually used with Joseph in the beginning and here at the end, lie with me, and probably numerous times in between. But she's the one saying those words. Now she puts her words into Joseph's mouth. Who else do we know that was falsely accused in such a manner? Thank you. Somebody say it. You're all going, I don't know, was that Jesse or David?
Just David.
Afraid to say Jesus now. Good Lord. I'm sorry. I apologize. I won't do that again.
We didn't do our double jeopardy question.
Right. So she falsely accuses Joseph and gets the whole household in on it. Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home. There's no love here. It doesn't even. The language itself bears this out. It doesn't say till her husband came home. It says till Joseph's master came home. And she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us." So
It's your fault.
she kind of puts it in his face too. She doesn't care. Came into me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted, to make sport of me is a better translation, I think. He's trying to make sport of me. He's making fun of me. He's mocking me. Like I'm his pet or something. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house. Or you could say, the implication here is that he's trying to rape her. So this is kind of an attempted rape. But I screamed and I fought it off with my scream and he got scared and he left. But I have his garment right here. So this is proof that it happened. Right? This is why you always have to do a little more investigating. It's not proof that it happened. As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, she's at it again. This is the way your servant treated me. His anger was kindled. Was his anger kindled at Joseph? Or who? And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. Now, if you believe your darling wife and the servants whom she is convinced to bear witness about the event, that this young man whom you have elevated, whose God has been with him and blessed him and has made you a fortune, tried to take advantage of your darling wife. Even, according to her, trying to lie with her and attempting almost to rape her. What are you going to do with that young man if you are Potiphar?
Kill him.
You're going to kill him. You're going to make it public so that nobody else knows about this. I mean, so that nobody else tries this in your house again. Dang it, it's your house. You're going to make sure this never happens again. But Potiphar doesn't do that. He puts him in prison. And not Rikers Island,
Yeah.
you know, not Alcatraz. He puts him in a little fancy prison. He puts him in a low.
With Martha Stewart.
Yeah, this is where Martha Stewart goes.
Minimum security.
This is where the king's prisoners go. I mean, we're going to see in the next chapter that the cupbearer and baker are in this prison with Joseph eventually, right? I mean, this is not where you put hardened criminals. This is not where you put attempted rapists. My whole point in bringing all of that out is that I don't think Potiphar believes a word of his wife's story, but he has to save face.
Maybe he's heard it before, too.
Maybe he's heard it before, but he's worried about his reputation. He's worried about how he's going to be viewed by the people in the army, and especially if news gets to Pharaoh. He's worried about. He doesn't buy her story. He puts him into the least secure prison, the least punishing prison around.
Why are you here? Oh yeah, that's why I'm here too.
Where, and then of course we know what happens, but the Lord was with Joseph, back again, and Joseph is elevated to be in charge of the prison. Because everything Joseph did, the Lord made it succeed. So, and here's, real quick, just to end today before I forget about this, but who does Potiphar remind you of here?
Pontius Pilate.
Yes, Pontius Pilate. He knows Jesus isn't guilty, but he wants to save face. Or King Darius with Daniel.
Yeah.
He has no desire to put Daniel to death, to put him in the lion's den, but it'll look bad. He did sign they tricked him and they got him to sign the paper that said, got to put him in the lion's den. You know, and you see, there's other characters you could think of too. Nebuchadnezzar with Terry's favorite trio, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So Joseph is definitely the type of Christ here throughout his story, but he's falsely accused and he's put in prison. And Luther, maybe I'll start next week by quoting what Luther says about this, because he applies everything to Christ, to the story of Christ. You know, how Christ was put in prison. He claims that this is Joseph's crucifixion, death, burial, and then on the other side of the prison sentence, he's going to rise to new life and rule over all things. So it's pretty cool stuff. So I don't think Potiphar believes Missy. I think we're not giving her name, but I just think of her as a Missy Potiphar.
Miss Potiphar?
Yeah. He doesn't believe her, but he's got to save face. Oh, that's what I was trying to think of. It's Herod with John the Baptist,
Herodias.
right? Whatever you want, up to half of my kingdom I will give you, because he's full of lust for Salome, right? Herodias' daughter.
After he got his brother-in-law's wife to begin with.
Exactly. So he's so full of lust that he promises this young lady, if you'll dance for me, I'll give you up to half of my kingdom. And then Herodias says to Salome, tell him we want John the Baptist hat on a golden
I don't
platter.
think the dance was a polka or anything like that.
No, it was a seductive dance. And then when they said that, he was horrified, right? And he should have said, no, I'll go back on my word. I'm not going to give you this innocent man's head. But
Save face.
all the rich people, all the important people were in the room, and you have to save face. That's ultimately what gets our Lord killed. But underlying all of that, this was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our sight. The reason Joseph ends up in prison is because the Lord is planning on making him second in command of the whole country to save his people. That's the whole point. So the Lord is getting Joseph, using Joseph, bringing Joseph to the fulfillment that he has planned for him. All right. Questions, comments, concerns, we'll pick up there next week. Issues, etc. Who's Jesse's son? The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship be with you all. The fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Good Lord. You got me so flustered I can't even say the Aaronic benediction.
Okay. Amen.
Amen.
Never.